Okay. Hello, mga ka-lockdown. Magandang umaga po. Wherever you are, maayong aga, maayong buntag, naimbag na bigat. Assalamualaikum. Good morning. Welcome to today's CLRG webinar talk show. I am Rafael Montes Jr. You can call me Paeng, and I'm working from home in Pasay City. I will be your moderator for today. Our webinar team is zooming from Quezon City, UP campus, Pampanga, and Laguna. Today's learning event is being brought to you by the Center for Local and Regional Governance of UP-NCPAG. If you are joining us today for the first time, CLRG is a public service unit of the University of the Philippines that was uniquely created to assist local governments and governance stakeholders through research, training, and consulting. We have an uninterrupted track record of 55 years since our establishment in 1965. And in the spirit of 21st century digital transformation, we are now online and bringing this roundtable to you. CLRG is a constituent center of the UP National College of Public Administration and Governance, or UP-NCPAG, based in our sprawling Diliman campus in Quezon City. This morning, our dean joins us, and he would like to say a few words before we begin our roundtable. So, friends, the dean of UP-NCPAG, Professor Dan Sagi.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Welcome po to this webinar on rebooting the local economy in the midst of COVID-19. Una sa lahat, I wish all of you and your families my best for your health and safety. I also would like to express my gratitude to the director and staff of the Center for Local and Regional Governance of the National College of Public Administration and Governance for hosting and facilitating this event. Thank you, CLRG, for continuously sharing your knowledge and research results. Thank you also to our great speakers for being here to share your knowledge and experiences. COVID-19 is a human tragedy, and our hearts go out to all those who have lost loved ones and to those putting themselves at risk to save others. It has put a spotlight on what and how leaders decide for the benefit and welfare of their constituents, partners, clients, and communities during these unprecedented times. Much about COVID-19 is still unknown. Public health officials are still determining the medical impacts of the virus, along with certain key characteristics, such as the probability of infection and the effect of the disease on humans in the long term. It is believed that the economic impact will in part depend on how the public reacts to the virus. Public reaction could allow the disease to spread more quickly and widely, or it could create unnecessary costs. We have adopted measures to prevent the spread of the virus. This includes the wearing of face masks and face shields, voluntary home isolation for ill persons and those who have comorbidities, community quarantines, voluntary home quarantine of exposed household members, social distancing, including, of course, the closure of schools, social distancing in the workplaces, and postponing or canceling mass gathering. However, these measures affected the economy. We know that because of community quarantines due to COVID-19, local governments will be missing out on important source of tax revenue from local businesses for an extended period of time. Without the national government and national revenue, local governments could be making a choice between raising local taxes or reducing services for citizens in order to remain solvent. There are also several correlated concerns that have risen due to the pandemic. Among them are the rising number of mental and social issues like suicides, unwanted pregnancies, failing maternal care, disruption of education, loss of employment, loss of business, and cybercrime. COVID-19 affects the economy in three main channels. One, it impacted on production. The lockdowns of shutdowns of businesses caused massive layoffs or furloughs in many businesses. Many of these businesses are not expected to open again. Two, because of the negative effects on production, there is disruption in the supply chain and the market. The transport restrictions of goods from one place to another made it impossible for businesses to meet their financial goals. Business related to travel and tourism are facing losses that may not be recovered. Finally, there are financial impacts on businesses and the financial sector. And this, of course, disrupts the inputs and or production stress on some firms. The economy is almost frozen. Many say we need to reboot the economy, while others say we have to reset the economy for the new normal. There is nothing to fear since adversity, the challenge we face, can also promote a positive opportunity and better future outcome. Whether it is rebooting, resetting, or restarting, this only means that we have to get back on our feet. We should be resilient, adaptive, and be well prepared for this crisis by adopting and implementing the right strategy. We must be swift, objective, focused, and supportive of each other. We hope that this webinar will be an effective exercise for sharing information to support and promote our efforts to bring hope to our people. Like always, CRG and CPAG and the other units of the college are more than willing to help you. I sincerely hope that the lessons learned in this webinar will assist all of us in our policies and programs as we move forward. Before concluding, allow me to thank all of you for your interest in this webinar. I trust that you would find the exercise to be a rewarding experience. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga ulit sa ating lahat.
Thank you very much, Dean Sagil. If you're only joining us now, we will be discussing the rebooting of the local economy in the midst of COVID-19. This is a CLRG webinar talk show. Okay, so to begin, let's do a situationer. The latest 2020 economic numbers are out, and it's not good. NEDA Secretary Kendrick Chua a few days ago said that 75% of the Philippine economy was shut down by the pandemic. The Philippine economy contracted 9 percentage points in the first semester of 2020. Manufacturing and services experienced their biggest contractions in decades. One ray of hope, however, is agriculture, which registered a net growth of 1.6%. Infrastructure and exports seem to be on the mend as well. But because the pan in pandemic means all, the economic downturn due to the coronavirus affects all countries and economies. Many are posed to or have already declared a recession. And while we are used to devastating calamities, most of these tend to be localized. But with COVID, you don't get infected, you still take an economic hit, a big one for some. Everyone had to take a hit. National government and local governments are probably dealing with the biggest relief operation and dole out in living memory. Thousands of people are unemployed, businesses have closed, uncertain whether they will still be able to reopen if and when the pandemic passes. And while the national infection and economic numbers can be overwhelming and depressing, its manifestations are almost entirely local. That neighborhood store, the day laborer, the small restaurant, and the suking karinderya. Masakit ang walang racket, to put it simply. But not all is bad. Some good news. The infection rate seems to be going down with our R0 at 0.95. In layman's terms, meaning an infected person can only infect less than one person at a time. UP Octa expert group statistician Professor Guido David said that we have already flattened the curve, but cautions against complacency. Some not so good news. It seems any vaccination will only take place by the middle of 2021, and that is an optimistic prediction. And so that is why LGUs are reevaluating their options for reopening. While it is easy to think that reopening is as simple as flipping a light switch, albeit with masks and social distancing, things are a lot more complicated than that. So, rebooting may be the correct term. While localities sharply differ in terms of public health status and economic capacity, this period of lockdowns has also become our period of economic soul searching. In order to help us chart this COVID frontier where no human has gone before, we have put together today's panel. We have with us today, zooming in from, I suppose, Quezon City, Dr. Monina Bukut. She is assistant professor at the Asian Institute of Tourism in UP Diliman. She holds a doctorate from UP NCPAG and a master's from Sophia University in Tokyo, Japan. Her research interests include resilience of local tourism destinations and tourism DRRM. She has previously worked for the House Committee on Tourism and is consultant to the ADB and the European Union. Later, zooming from Omaha, Nebraska, USA, from within billionaire Warren Buffett's barangay, is former UP Los Baños professor and current affiliate faculty of the Development Academy of the Philippines, Dr. Asar Javier. He is currently consultant to the DepEd, DSWD, the Asia Foundation, and is the national coach and mentor on local economic development at the Local Government Academy of the DILG. He is also consultant to 2 congressmen, 6 mayors in the Philippines, and 1 city councilor in Japan. He is author of 4 books, 6 internationally refereed journals, and 96 commissioned researches on governance and LED. He has a PhD on international development from Nagoya University in Japan. And our third panelist, is the Economic Enterprise and Officer in charge of the Cagayan Tourism She is a Zumeng Bunyo Bakiran. Si ma'am hindi na na-retrench ng COVID, unlike other people, 3 ang trabaho niya. So, and then there's me, the most talkative webinar moderator in the country. So, let's get the ball rolling with what may be the most hard-hit economic sector, tourism. Dr. Monina Bukut, good morning po. Thank you for coming. Magandang umaga, ma'am. So, I guess,
good morning.
Let me pose the first question on tourism. Tourism has been exceptionally hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic. And according to Secretary Berna Romulo Puyat, the tourism arrivals declined by 73% in the first half of 2020. So that's from January to June. And 0 arrivals since the lockdowns in March. We have lost over 1 million jobs in tourism, accommodations, entertainment, and recreation. Everywhere tourism was decimated, any country. But in a sense, it was massive international travel that sort of caused the rapid spread of COVID-19. So how will tourism change now from the way we know it pre-pandemic?
Okay, the delivery of tourism services will definitely change in the short and medium term. Okay, so looking at how this crisis unfolds, let me share my slide, please. Okay, yep, there. The global pandemic has affected both receiving and sending countries. And the disease spread is caused by contact and proximity as our cities and urban centers have been more connected. Therefore, tourism is definitely been a trigger to this rapid transmission of the disease. Currently, there's no treatment and vaccine available, and so the risk of disease resurgence, even in partial reopening, um, is very likely. Okay, and so governments um, pushed for non-medical interventions, which includes very strict quarantine and border controls. So this has definitely hurt tourism because no travel, no tourism. So this has been really economically disruptive. And as you know, in previous crises, the association of the disease with place, like for example, the Spanish influenza, Asian SARS, African Ebola, this affects the image of the destination. And so therefore, the disease is also affecting, the pandemic is also affecting the place or how we handle the infection in the place, in the destination. Okay, so next slide. There. In statistics from the United Nations World Travel Organization, the World Tourist Organization, um, there's a downfall of around 60% of international tourism arrivals. And next slide, please. And the fall in international tourism receipts has gone down way below the 2000 levels. Okay, we have experienced SARS pandemic in around 2003, and also a global economic crisis in 2009. But no, this has not impacted the world as much as COVID-19. So what researchers like me are seriously considering now is to take this opportunity to help reset and make tourism more sustainable in the near term. So there will be, of course, a change in behavior. Short distance travel would be the norm. Domestic tourism will likely have a resurgence rather than international tourism, and that tourists will at least be more aware of their carbon footprint. As you see, when the world stopped, the borders closed, we saw that uh, the environment having a reprieve from pollution brought about by basically carbon emissions from airplanes, cars. So that's the hope of researchers. But what they fear is that after a cure has been found in a vaccine, we fear that um, we will return to business as usual. And this is bad because before the pandemic, we were um, the tourism sector is really over the edge, what they call over tourism, because of unsustainable practices. And so this must not continue. And that the hope is that we will find a better way to develop tourism in a manner that is both good for the people and for the environment.
So, ma'am, you mentioned that we will probably be relying more on domestic tourism.
Yes, more
So that,
probably. Mhm.
yes,
Yeah, domestic tourism because international travel may still be too restrictive at this time, and people would want to travel, and the only way that you would want people to travel is by the most direct route, by very private transportation like a car. So maybe short distance travel somewhere in your area, which is nature based, um, not visited by too many people, that would be a start.
So you're probably referring to what the government is doing now with travel bubbles, or what they call in Europe travel corridors, where you can travel. If you're from a low risk area, you travel within your area, or you travel to another low risk area. So if and when we get this virus under control, how soon do you think will people want to travel again, at least say domestically?
Okay. So, well, while I do know that people would still want to travel uh, soon, but we expect a slow rebound because the recovery will depend on how destinations will be able to implement, the strict health and sanitation protocols. And this also will depend on measures instituted by local governments for confidence building. So you want people to want to travel again based on the preparedness of the local tourism destination. And so I think that the first step is to strictly implement health and sanitation protocols, um, to institute um, some form of digital transformation of transaction, meaning um, you should be ready to be able to offer contactless payments. You should be ready to use IT in those transactions. And also, there would be several requirements like travel insurance and health certificates. Although this would make travel costly, and then we expect that people will not have the same disposable income as before, or are too afraid to spend lavishly on a vacation. And also there's assumption that people will become poorer, and therefore we expect a very slow rebound. So people perhaps would want to um, travel again maybe by the end of the year, or how well or how soon local government units will be able to prepare for the incoming tourists. And that therefore it's very slow, a small number. The travel bubbles will also work, but maybe for one region, per region only, like in Baguio City, in the Cordillera region. They're trying to experiment on it now because of low transmission in that area, but probably less in other regions where there are high infection rates still at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm thinking of already two follow-up questions, but I think uh, this question is also related to it, since most provinces or municipalities, many localities have tourism as their largest industry. Plus,
Right,
there are loads of allied industries that
right.
are connected to direct tourism. Uh, but the pandemic has exposed a lot of vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, tourism promotion remains largely a national task when it comes to, say, international promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, However, most impacts of tourism, as I said earlier, are largely local. Um, so, as a follow-up to your earlier answer, you said that people would be a lot poorer, or would have a lot more disposable income. Does that mean that most tourists in the short term would probably be only rich people? And who would say that it's okay to travel, say, to one area already? I mean, we sort of don't have an alert system that tells a citizen to say, pwede na akong pumunta dun
Right.
sa lugar na yon. And
Oh,
so these are questions that I think will help local governments recalibrate their tourism strategies to sort of fit this new normal, at least for the medium term. So, your thoughts, ma'am?
okay, so my thoughts lang about tourism vulnerabilities under the COVID situation. So what we should still remember is that public health systems take time to build. And we cannot accept tourists unless we have a very strong public health system in our area. So if not, we really need to seriously rethink reopening our place or destination to welcome tourists. However, I think this situation also calls for a need to help our tourism enterprises, not just by giving bailouts, but also by helping them rethink their business strategies. And uh, the financial support should be tied with certain conditionalities. For example, for them to be able to offer products or services that use less resources. Therefore, it should cost less. Parang ganon. And destinations with large tourism sector have very few options to diversify to, for example, say agriculture or mining or whatever. Uh, but then they have to capitalize on the free and very huge human labor or human resource sector, very professional sector. So, knowing that, LGUs also need to work more towards capturing the informal sectors, not just the ones that are officially employed, because vulnerabilities also stem from this group. And the national government cannot do it alone, or the local government cannot do it alone. There should be a very uh, intensive coordination between and among agencies and at different levels of government. Because as you see, um, tourism cannot do this alone. Tourism, of course, and a lot of a host of other government agencies like the Department of Health, um, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Um, Also, they really need to coordinate not just for the local level but at the same time at the national level. So, I think what this shows is the promotions part should not at this time be focused on, but rather we have to strictly follow the national government strategy, the IATF recommendations, because overall they see that the conditions at the national level, and they have to dictate at least you're all moving in one direction. So the local governments need to be wary of all those regulations, of all those directives coming from above. And they cannot do it alone. This pandemic is too big for local government units to really push for tourism when it is not yet, or the country is not yet ready.
Speaking of confidence building measures, ma'am,
Yes.
uh, do you think there will be a global rethinking of what can be considered as safe tourism?
Mm-hmm.
People would be less inclined to go, say, on a cruise ship, given the the recent history of cruise ships. You obviously cannot cram, say, 20 people on a bangka for island hopping. I mean, given the IATF guidelines now on social distancing, it's outdoors, but it's still 20 people in a small sea craft. Or
Mm-hmm.
backpackers in, say, a dorm type hostel might become a thing of the past. And with the economic downturn, people will be less likely to spend and travel, as we mentioned earlier. So, should LGUs continue to invest and pin their hopes on tourism?
Well, my answer is still a yes. Because safe tourism, well, maybe just this actually just translates to tourists having motivation to travel, and then tourists perception of safety. Okay. So in my next slide, please. Um, it shows that tourism is quite resilient even during global crisis. So we saw that in 2000 terror attacks in the US, 2004 tsunami and terrorism in Bali. We saw that in 2009 global financial crisis. And the world is more connected now than ever. And this connectedness uh, this just does not mean that only travelers, but also we have businesses, business people going around. So we cannot stop, I think, tourism, and there's still hope for tourism. Maybe it will have a very slow resurgence, but um, definitely there will be tourism as the appetite has for travel has not waned. Maybe now people are more cautious. People have less disposable income, but we don't see that it will permanently stay that way. And as I've said, we can uh, promote travel bubbles. Although, of course, a lot of countries have tried this and then uh, scrapped it all together because of the recent resurgence in disease or in disease infection due to some travelers who were able to enter and then they tested positive. But for the meantime, short distance travel by car and your local regional travel will be the best way to go for local government units at this time.
Okay, bang. So the World Organization, which you mentioned earlier, has
Yes.
recommended 5 ways to recalibrate the tourism industry, and we found this very very concise guide on the internet. And one of them is uh, very very focused on what the WTO had recommended as one of the 5 ways to recalibrate is the advancement of innovation and digitalization of the
Mhm.
tourism industry. And
Mhm.
from this guide, you can see that we don't have bad reviews about our destinations. What seems to be a
Mhm.
challenge for international tourists or even local tourists even before the pandemic is that they cannot pay through cashless options like credit or debit cards.
Mhm.
But now with non-contact and physical distancing protocols in place for the medium term, how
Mhm.
can local governments help their constituents achieve this goal of digitalization? Kasi ang problema nga ma'am, yung sa payments pa lang, medyo ano na,
Right.
hindi na tayo okay.
Right. So I know we have been slow to adapt to the economy, yeah, the electronic or internet transactions. But I think as early as last year, the Banco Centrala has rolled out an enabling framework for e-money. And then, during the pandemic, I found out that there were a lot of mobile-based e-money and e-banking transactions. Because I myself, I'm afraid to go out and do my transactions physically sa bank. And that, now that I've learned that you can actually cash out money from, like, for example, GCash, GrabPay. There are so many options actually, and even my online palengke, which I get my produce from, actually transacts digitally through GCash. And GCash is very the money that you send via GCash, they could already withdraw from very small retail shops, yung mga loading centers. Um, so I think that the local governments need to do is to ensure that investments in infrastructure for better connectivity, so in partnership with telcos, would be the best way to improve those digital transactions. Because there's already platforms that you can do this with. Even you just need a mobile phone with an internet, to cash in or to get money or to send money. I don't need to go to the bank. You don't need an ATM. You don't need a credit card. Okay, so even a fisherman or farmer or a banca boatman would be able to get paid through these types of transactions.
Okay, siguro ma'am, my last question for you for the moment no, is
Yes.
in a recent forum by UNCFAL last
Mm-hmm.
July,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Randy Durband of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council said that most probably when it comes to international tourism for the Philippines, our closest neighbors who have the robust public health systems to control the coronavirus will most likely be our first tourists. So this would be like countries like
Mm-hmm.
Japan, South Korea,
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan, and maybe Singapore. However, he also said that the citizens of these countries value sanitation, which is a very
Mm-hmm.
local concern
Mm-hmm.
and also an important pandemic issue. Let's
Yeah.
just say we aren't the cleanest country in the neighborhood. Hindi naman tayo pinakamadumi, but you know we have issues. So will we still be able to capitalize on tourism from East Asia if and when you know these East Asian tourists would like to come to the Philippines?
My answer is yes, of course, we still can capture those markets because if we really follow strictly those health and sanitation protocols being instituted by the Department of Tourism, especially in accommodation sector, in the transport sector, we would be able to still gain, a lot of uh, this the confidence of a lot of tourists from these countries. In any case, compared with countries in Southeast Asia, I think that our measure for cleanliness is well way better, if I may say that's my opinion. Way better than our counterparts. So if we could really just stick to those health and sanitation protocols, and I think there wouldn't be any problem. And as I've said, this time we could the local government units could refocus its attention on measures that will promote the circular economy, and that means less pollution and use of renewable energy, low consumption of energy, and also capitalizing on the local supply chain. So kasi para hindi na masyado yung emissions coming from the transporting of these goods and services from one part of the country to the other. So they have to source these produce locally. And then for the meantime, we should be able to plan for crisis at the local level. So crisis like this affecting a number or a huge number of our industry, especially the tourism industry, a clear crisis plan, a crisis communication plan is recommended. And the Asian Institute of Tourism is conducting several webinars already on how to um, prepare those crisis plans if you're interested.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you.
For the
Yes.
moment, I'd like to say thank you.
Okay.
Uh, Dr. Bukot will be with us with the panel discussion a little later. But speaking of supply chains, na mention ni Professor Bukot, let me bring in a supply chain expert. He is zooming from Omaha, Nebraska. Dr. Asar Javier. Good morning and good evening, sir.
Good morning,
Thank
everyone.
you for transcending time zones to be with us today. Good evening,
Yes,
sir.
yes, good morning sa mga nanonood sa atin ngayon dyan sa NCPAG.
Yes, sir. I guess my first question to you, since you are the national coach and mentor of local economic development at the LGA, and you have advocated for inclusive local development. And in the framework of inclusive LED, it implies that all sectors benefit from any recovery program. So here we see a woman who's obviously receiving a cash aid, and then you have GP drivers who are literally begging on the street. And that doesn't seem to be very inclusive. So we know it's harder for this type of disaster because of the sheer magnitude of the economic problem. How can a local government efficiently use its finite resources to make its recovery program as inclusive as possible?
Thank you, Paeng, for that very good but very difficult question. No? So, alam mo, prior to COVID, we have been advocating to various local governments the maximization of their corporate powers for them to be able to pursue local economic development. Now, primarily because majority of our local governments are having a hard time coping up with the various welfare resources that are needed by the communities. No? So we the 79% dependence on the internal revenue allotment of the various municipalities in the Philippines and about 50% for the cities doesn't bode well for investments to come in really to the various cities and municipalities in the Philippines. Now, this 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 environment provides the difficulty and the complexities for various local governments to be able to address, primarily because first, to address inclusivity in a pandemic, we have to understand the difference between local economic development and local economic recovery. Now, we are often confusing the two primarily because one, when we talk of local economic development, the term itself is long term. But when we talk of local economic recovery, we're talking here of the short term. Meaning, if we look at the International Labor Organization definition of local economic recovery, we're talking here of 3 to 6 months to 3 years. So in other words, the focus should be in the short run, while lead is focused on in the long term. So that's in terms of time frame, that's a difference. Now, second, if you look at my slides here, if we try to look at for what it is basically local economic recovery is basically temporary creation of opportunities. While in lead, it is an obligation as per local government code section 15 to 22 for communities to create wealth, which is why there are economic enterprise created, but sadly only 10% meet the standards of the various national government agencies in terms of its profitability and sustainability. So in this classification, we will have a hard time now for an inclusive economic recovery and development. That is why it is important for us to understand first the meaning, like for example, which brings me to my next slide. It's very important for us to understand that for economic recovery, the target for cash injection should be small scale. So when you talk about inclusivity of the poor, then we are actually strategizing an inclusive and civic local economic development as a major base for economic recovery. So our target is to create quick jobs. Our target is to create small business support that in essence is very civic in a way that we have to focus on the retail economy because primarily the community will move if the small businesses will move. So kita natin yan sa nangyayari. Yung mga malalaking kumpanya because of the high logistics are closing down. Pero yung mga maliliit, nagpupunta sa internet, sa Facebook, para ipakita ang kanilang produkto o services. So in other words, we have to look at it in that particular manner. Otherwise, mahihirapan tayo. Like my mantra in various local governments engagement that I have, even while I am here in the United States, is to provide a program for small business support and development. So in my next slide, I think I have reiterated that particular how do we engage the communities? How do we engage in economic development, the poor in community economic development?
Okay, sir. Very, very interesting distinctions between LED and local economic recovery. I guess, sir, when you're talking about local economic recovery, you're talking about, say, stimulus packages and welfare support for particularly for those who are in retail, yung nabanggit yung mga sectors, no? Quick jobs.
Yes.
Uh, ang ano lang dun, sir, as you mentioned with LED, having only say 10% which satisfy the criteria of the national standards for, say, so targets for wealth creation, that wealth has been reduced now. So maliit na
Yes.
siya, and then mas mababa pa siya, nabawasan pa siya ngayon. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult both for local governments and for national, for this short-term recovery.
That's very true, Paeng, no? If we try to look at it in that context, yes. But let us always remember that the local government code has an enabling framework for the use of its corporate powers, which means it is not the local governments who will create the businesses for them to earn. It should be a supporting environment that they need to create for businesses, especially small cottage and micro businesses, for their local economy to move. And we have seen that in the private sector, wherein the innovations that are coming into the communities are actually coming from majority of the private sector, because many of our colleagues in the local governments focus on social development, social recovery, social assistance, where in fact they are now seeing the results na ubos na yung pera nila. So, hindi uubra kasi na patuloy na pagbigay. Ang ating focus ay ayuda or yung socialized assistance program natin. That is why nakita ng national government na kailangan pumunta tayo sa economic recovery. So yun yung magandang diferensya dyan. Now, many of our interventions, however, are directed towards LED rather than LER. Ang kailangan natin ngayon ay yung maramdaman ng tao yung kanyang kaginhawahan during the pandemic. Otherwise, mawawalan siya ng pag-asa na at patuloy siyang magiging dependent sa local governments. Ang problema, wala nang pera na yun eh. So ang kinakailangan, i-create yung environment na yung community kikita ng pera. Kaya ang LER, hindi ka basta mangungutang sa bangko at mamimigay ka. Kasi 1 linggo lang nila kakainin yon, yung ayuda. Ang kailangan mo ay magsuporta ka ng negosyo para siya ay kumita. At makikita natin yan sa iba't ibang parte ng mundo, ang mga lokal na pamahalaan ay mayroong mga iba-iba ng programa pagdating sa economic recovery. Pero sa atin, kalimitan, napakasakit nito para sa akin bilang guro ng local economic development, na ang nakikita ko ay halos ngayon ay wala pa rin tayong programa ng economic recovery kung saan yung workforce, yung unemployed, yung mga small businesses ay pwedeng tumungo sa kanyang local government para siguraduhin na meron akong makukuha na economic recovery subsidy or supplies na pwede akong makarecover sa aking kinasasadlakan dahil sa pandemya. Ako pag tiningnan ko kayo kanina, pwede akong pupunta sa website kaagad ng City ng Omaha, makikita ko may dashboard kaagad. O ito para sa unemployed, ito para sa mga negosyo, ito. Pag tiningnan mo, yung isang tiningnan ko may hometown economic recovery plan pa. Mag-provide ka ng proposal sa LGU mo para masigurado na meron kang negosyong mapopondohan nila. So, i-evaluate ng mga experts ito kung feasible ba. Pagkatapos, bibigyan ka ng ayuda. So, makikita mo, hindi relief ang ibibigay. Kung hindi ang ibibigay, ay paano ka makaka-recover in the next year or so. So, ito yung essence ng economic recovery na sinasabi ng ating national government. Kasi 4 na pillar yung binanggit ng national government eh. Emergency health financial services, yung apat na pillar, yung isa, economic recovery pillar, pilay tayo doon. Pero kasi nakafocus lahat tayo sa health. So akin, ang advokasya ko ngayon, mabuti meron kayong ganitong programa, ay siguraduhin, maintindihan ano ba ang inclusive at civic local economic development na kung tawagin ngayon ay local economic recovery. O maraming tawag. Sa inyo, ang tawag nyo, rebooting. Ang NEDA, ang tawag, recharge.ph. Yung iba, recovery. Maraming tawag ngayon eh. Pero lahat yan, iisang ibig sabihin. Masiguraduhan na mararamdaman ng taong bayan na siya ay aangat at makakalaban sa pandemya.
Thank you for emphasizing that very, very clearly, sir. Kasi I found out that medyo matagal na rin na ang framing ng narrative is always about health. Not that that's bad, but some people tend to think that since wala namang nagkakasakit sa family nila, so parang medyo malayo yung pandemic sa kanila. But they're affected by the lockdown and they are suffering economically. And your point of local governments being enablers and creating this environment for recovery is related to my next question. Kasi during the beginning of the lockdowns, nagkaroon ng brief disruption of the supply chain. And we how should I say, agricultural ang orientation from the local government. So they started stopping the vehicles. So even when the PNP had to warn the LGUs not to block essential goods. So that and what now can LGUs hello? Was I
Yes,
out?
Paeng. Yes, yes, Paeng. I can hear you now. Hello, can you hear me?
Sir, paulit po. Please repeat.
Hi, sir. Hi, sir.
Yes, Paeng. Can you?
Okay po. Sorry po, third world communication infrastructure. um, so let me repeat the question, sir.
Yes, yes.
At the beginning of the lockdown, the supply chain was briefly disrupted, and this is, I mean, related to your point of local governments being able to provide that environment for continued economic activity and also for economic recovery. And what can you advise LGUs now so they can avoid any future disruption of the supply chain? If and when sometimes if you have a spike, there would be an escalation of quarantine levels, maybe even if it's granular. When
Okay. I can
Hi,
just.
Sir, I think it's about, yeah. Yes, sir,
Okay.
please continue.
Okay. So, from what I have heard from Paeng, a very good tool that we can use in economic recovery is the local supply chain. Like the slide he presented on natatapon yung mga pagkain, etc. Pag tinignan natin sa iba-ibang sectors, sa iba-ibang supply chain ng iba't ibang crops or commodities, ganun din yung mga nangyayari. Like for example, here in my slide now, meron akong kinuha dito na fishery supply chain. And you will note that majority of the disruption due to COVID ay number one, transportation and border closures. And you look, pag tinignan nyo itong slide ko na isa, yung supply centers natin at yung demand centers natin sa fishery, previous slide please. Yung supply chain ng isda sa atin, tingnan nyo kung saan ang gagaling, nasa Pampanga, Laguna, Batangas. Pagkatapos yung mga maliliit na fries sa tilapia ito, galing sa Bicol. Pag tinignan nyo, saan ba ito binebenta? Nasa Angeles, sa Baguio, sa Cagayan, sa Car, sa Isabela, sa La Union, sa Metro Manila. So hindi uubra yung ating ginagawa ngayon na yun yung nagiging sanhi kung bakit hindi natitigil o nadidisrupt ang supply chain. Pangalawa, itong ating prior to COVID, makikita natin yung dependence sa food service channels. So, hindi maliwanag kung ano ba yung pwedeng mang-retail pagdating sa ating mga delivery at marketing ng ating mga produkto. Pangatlo, ay yung tinatawag nating trading practices natin. Yan yung mga causes ng disruption. Pag tinignan mo sa isda ay yung bulungan, yung sinasabi kung magkano yung presyo sa Japan, mas maganda sa Tokyo, yung may bulungan din, pero sa tuna naman, di ba? Saka yung konsignasyon, lahat yan sinasubject sa social and physical distancing. So, hindi uubra yan. So, pang-apat, yung price volatility natin. Dahil nga walang supply, talaga, o kaya maraming supply, babagsak o tataas ang presyo. So, ang bottom line, yung stability of demand due to market closure. Maraming saradong palengke. So itong mga ito, pag tinignan mo, kinumpara natin sa iba-ibang mga lugar, ay hindi sila sarado. Hindi sila, when I say lugar, not in the Philippines, but outside. So ito yung mga paraan kung paano natin makikita na mahuhuli natin kung saan pwedeng i-open yung ekonomiya kung gagamit tayo ng supply chain. Kung makikita natin, o like sa tilapia, huli mo, hanggang Baguio, hanggang Sagada, nakakarating ito. Pero saan galing? Doon sa bayan ko sa Laguna. So, o kaya sa Batangas. So, makikita mo yung takbo ng kung saan pupunta yung consumption natin. Yun yung dapat inaaral ng ating mga lokal na pamahalaan. So, kung ako tatanungin, yung mga nasa demand centers na to, saka yung nasa supply center na mga LGU, dapat nag-i-interlocal cooperation yan, depende sa supply chain. So yan yung titingnan natin sa macro perspective sa supply chain. Ngayon, yung next slide ko, pag tinignan mo naman, ito na yung pwede tayong pumapil ang poor. Yung tinatawag natin, develop a local supply chain where the poor can participate. Number one, tignan niyo yung ginagawa namin, ako bilang consultant sa Cambodian Ministry of Rural Economic Development, tinuturuan ko yung mga Cambodians na mga maliliit para sila ay magko-compete. Makikita niyo yung ginagawa namin sa Cambodia pre-COVID, yun yung dapat gawin ngayon. Like for example, nag-create kami na sino yung maglilinis ng bangka, sino yung pwedeng gumawa manahilang net, pagkatapos yun yung bibigyan ng trabaho. Sa inputs pa lang yan. Pagdating sa ibang chain pa, makikita na parami ng parami. Like for example, yung mga walang ginagawang kabataan, sila maghuhukay ng fish pond. So nagkikreate kami ng labor pool. Sa atin, hindi lahat. So kailangan yung may backhoe. So yung may backhoe, yun yung kikita. So sino ba ang may-ari ng backhoe? Di yung mayaman. So pag tinignan natin, hindi nakaka-participate ang poor. Now there's this very good supply chain na ginawa ng ating isang kaibigan na pag tinignan niyo yung ube cheese pandesal, papasok na tayo sa digital economy, sa retail economy na supply chain. Tingnan niyo, maraming halaman, maraming pandesal, maraming ube, may cheese pandesal na sa Facebook niyo. Kung ito ba naman ay titingnan natin from a supply chain perspective, tingnan niyo, pwede natin i-cluster ang community. Sino ang pwedeng trader, sino ang pwedeng supplier, sino ang producer ng ube cheese pandesal. So kung ikaw ay magbebenta sa Facebook, ako naman, i-mobilize ko yung ibang farmers, ikaw ang mag-supply ng ube. So pag tinignan natin, walang nakatunganga, kundi lahat naghahanap ng hanap buhay kahit na for example, makikita nyo rin sa Facebook, walang nagdi-deliver ng ube cheese pandesal nila. Sinasabi, every Sunday lang ang delivery ha. Pwede ko bang i-gather yung mga motorista? Pasasabihin ko, yung mga namimisikleta, daily ka na ngayon. So yun yung support ko bilang LGU sa aking supply chain sa small business. Mag-mobilize ako. Ito yung ayuda ko sa mga bikers. I-deliver nyo itong mga pandesal na to dun sa mga orders nila. Meron kayo 50 sentimo kada pandesal. These are the things that provide us the creation of quick jobs. Now, may ginagawa sa Iloilo, sa Casa Negros. Napakagandang ginagawa ng Iloilo Provincial Economic Development Office. Nakikinig sa atin si Biglao, sa Casa Negros Occidental, si Ellen Halandoni. Pag tinignan niyo yung ginagawa nila, sa next slide ko, yung LGUs and yung engaging the community in the supply chain. Tingnan niyo itong mga ginagawa ng ating mga ibang mga local government counterparts natin na nagsisimula na sila sa pre-COVID, saka during COVID. Meron modelo kung sinusunod, yung tinatawag mapping, mapping, organizing, development, engagement, and leadership. Pag tinignan natin ito, makikita nyo kagad saang area ng supply chain, saka sino ang producer, supplier, saka trader, na malalaman nyo na kagad. Pag binobilize yung tao, malalaman nyo ang needs, ang supply inventory, anong klaseng agreement, anong klaseng suppliers ang inyong imobilize, anong competitiveness ang ide-develop nyo, and then sa LGU, ano yung imo-monitor ninyo na quality innovations. Kunyari yung ube cheese pandesal, imo-monitor nyo. So for example, yung ginagawa sa Iloilo, lahat ng mga pwedeng ibenta ng mga farmers, like for example, imo-mobilize niya ng PEDIC o yung tinatawag na Provincial Economic Development Investments ng Iloilo Province. Pagkatapos yun ang tutulungan nila si farmer, si producer na i-market yan through Facebook. So ginagawa yan nila Binglao. And then sa pre-COVID naman, may ginagawa yung manager ng isang local economic enterprise, si Ellen Halandoni, ginagawa naman niya, pinoprofile niya ano yung mga pwedeng isupply ng community sa local economic enterprise. So anong nangyayari? Kumikita yung mga tao on the average 6,000 pesos per month. So, mas feasible siya kaysa kuhanin natin sila as JO sa mga local government. So, ito yung mga magagandang benepisyo ng paggamit ng supply chain pagdating sa economic recovery. Kahit na kasi yung mga plantito at plantita dyan, yung mga halaman, o sinong pwede mag-supply ng paso, i-mobilize sa community. So, hindi na mamaya, pag-uusapan natin yung mga pagbabago magaganap sa mga papel natin, sa roles natin. Like for example, si accountant, magbabago ang role niya sa kasi budget officer. Tuturuan niya ngayon ng feasibility itong mga to. So hindi na necessarily si COA lang yung kanyang susundin. Kung hindi taong bayan na susundin niya. O tuturuan natin ng finance itong mga to kasi para hindi malugi. Para siguraduhin na ang kanyang negosyo ay lalago at mag-i-spur ng ekonomiya sa ating mga barangays at sa mga munisipyo.
Okay, sir. Very interesting. Sir, there is an assumption that once when there's a vaccine or when the pandemic is under control, that businesses can and will reopen. Parang mag-flip ka lang ng switch and then, everybody returns to their former economic activities. But many have indefinitely or permanently closed already because of the more than 6 months of lockdown. So how can that be addressed by our LGUs po?
Okay. Unang-una, titingnan natin, merong akong tatlong pwede nating tingnan kung paano ba natin pwede i-address yung mga yan. Kanina binanggit ni Dr. Bukat yung pagdating ng rebound ng leisure travel. Makikita natin, ito naramdam ko dito sa Amerika, marami ng yung pent-up decisions ba to consume and travel. sa Tagalog, atat na lumabas. No? So, at inip na sa bahay. So, nabanggit ito ni Dr. Bukat at ito dadating. So, dapat nagpe-prepare na tayo. Like, no isang linggo na sa Busuanga ako, online, tinuturuan namin sila ng preparation para sa pagbubukas ng regional travel. So, hindi yung kung kailan sinabi ng IATF lang, saka sa akin magpe-prepare. Hindi. So, ipe-prepare na natin. Both LER and LED, ano yung gagawin sa tourism dahil may lockdown. So, yan yung pagdating sa turismo. Hindi ko na yung babanggitin. Pangalawa, titingnan natin yung upskilling ng systems at practices ng mga local governments. Kanina binanggit ko na ano yung bagong papel natin bilang mga opisyales ng pamahalaan para magkaroon ng mga bagong competencies at tingnan yung mga practices natin. Kagaya ng binanggit mo pa, ni-reveal ng pandemyang ito yung tunay na karakter ng mga kompetensya ng ating mga pamahalaang opisyales natin. So, ngayon, challenge ngayon tayo na dati, okay kasi compliant naman tayo sa national government. Ngayon hindi na. Kailangan compliant na tayo sa taong bayan, which is really the essence of local development. So pangatlo, yun yung tawag ko accelerated digitization. So ito yung pwede nating puntahan para makatulong tayo sa lahat ng mga ilang negosyo. So for example, yung mga restaurant business, pwede ba natin silang tulungan sa catering? So parang gano'n na. So, and then second na nakikita ko dyan, yung reshaping ng sales at retail collaboration. Anong ibig ko sabihin ito? Kasi mawawala na ng boundary na sasabihin natin, eto Caloocan ako, eto Makati ako. Sapagkat ngayon, digital economy ka, talampas ka ngayon ng geographic political boundaries. So ngayon, hindi mo na pwedeng sabihin na hindi ko natutulungan itong mga to. Hindi, sapagkat nandoon ngayon yung merkado, kung nandoon ang sales. So, balalampas ka. Kagaya ng kwento ko sa tilapia kanina, nanggagaling sa Batangas, sa Laguna, sa Cavite at Bicol. Pero saan minamarket? Region 1, buong Metro Manila, etc. So, ngayon maliwanag na kung ano ang ibig sabihin sa atin ng interlocal cooperation na noong araw hirap na hirap tayong maunawaan. Ngayon ang liwanag na. So, ang aking sinasuggest, intensive use ng value chain saka ng mga small business competitiveness tools ng ating mga lokal na pamahalaan para makatulong sa mga negosyo.
Okay, sir. Speaking of small business, government in the Philippines is quite notorious when it comes to the accuracy of data when, who should receive government aid, parang ganon, since we're talking about recovery. So we have seen that in the disputed lists for the 4Ps and the SAP, and now we're talking about, say, enterprises, and that's conflated by the fact that most of our economy is informal, and that has turned into 45% of those in the formal sector being unemployed. So how can LGUs now ensure that nobody is not left behind this time around?
Okay, pag tinignan natin ang paggamit ng data sa ating mga kasama sa local government, majority of this data are actually compliance to national program implementation so that there should be a basis for decision making in effective program implementation which are all national. My suggestion is actually a blended approach for data management in terms of a vertical, horizontal, and community-based databases. So, hindi na siya uubra ngayon kasi ang liwanag, ako bilang consultant ng DSWD ngayon, yan ang aking sinasabi, na dumating na ang pag-uusig sa central local tensions na hindi na uubra. Kinakailangan mangyari na ang otonomiya at bumalik tayo sa essence ng decentralization pagdating sa lahat ng devolved functions ng ating pamahalaan. Unang-una, hindi uubra na kada ahensya ay may database ang local government. Naiisa rin naman ang mga ini-interview at sinasurvey niya. Sapagkat ito ay napakagastos, napaka-taxing, inaalis pa natin sa trabaho ang ating mga poor communities kasi may mag-i-interview sa kada isang national agency, may database. So hindi uubra ito. Pangalawa, dumadami ang trabaho ni LGU. So kinakailangan sa aking suggestion talaga, magkaroon ng shift yung bureaucratic to scientific thinking. Like for example, sa SIDRA, hindi naman natin, napakahirap nitong mga databases na ginagamit natin sa SIDRA na dapat, baka hindi LGU yan, baka dapat national yan. Pagkatas yung implementation lang nito kung saan gagamitin yan based sa scientific research, yun yung gagamitin natin sa community. Tingnan mo, pag tinignan mo ang CBMS, hanggang ngayon, hindi siya ginagamit. Pero maraming LGUs na noong panahon ng pandemya, yun yung mga ginamit nilang data sa SAP handling. So ito yung aking suggestion. Magkaroon ng blended database development which is vertical, horizontal, and community-based.
Very interesting, sir. So siguro my last question to you at this point in the interview. The economic downturn will have effects even a few years later, particularly for the revenues of the local governments, because we don't really compute revenues of the immediate past year, diba? So there will probably be a sharp decline in the revenues of local governments. So since recovery will be maybe around 2021 in the next year, what are your recommendations for LGUs to surpass this limitation, especially bearing in mind their task to revive the local economy, which is also their source of revenue?
Thank you, Paeng. Ang number one na sagot ko dyan, maximization of corporate powers of local governments. We have to look at it from the shift of local government to local government. So I'll be theoretical at this time. So dapat may meron tayong careful balance between politics and corporate as stated in section 15 to 22 of the local government code. Pangalawa, dapat maliwanag kung ano yung endogenous and stylized governance na dapat ginagawa ng mga local governments. Hindi dapat pare-pareho. Kasi ang nangyayari ngayon pare-pareho. Magkakaiba naman ang ating investments. Like magkakaiba ang ating financial and social capital. Pero pare-pareho yung mga program. So what happens is we have now a regressive pattern of financing economic development in Philippine local government. So yun yung aking tinitingnan. Dapat magkaroon tayo ng programa ng business retention and expansion para magkaroon ng territorial competitiveness. And then tingnan natin ang mga bagong development pagdating sa revenue generation na hindi si LGU ang nagne-negosyo kundi sinusuportahan niya ang negosyo. Pag ginawa natin to, mag-shift ang trabaho ng BPLO. So kung ang BPLO ngayon ay inagahantay lang siya ng negosyo magre-register sa kanya, baliktad na. Kinakailangan maghanap na siya na mag-i-invest dito. Kung yung local finance committee ay nasanay na ang minamanage nila ay internal revenue allotment lang, ngayon dapat dagdagan na nila ang kanilang mga pang-invest kasi dumagdag ang mga pangangailangan. So sa akin, kung tatanungin mo ko, ang liwanag pa, binabalik tayo kung ano yung sinasabi ng corporate powers 29 years ago. Matanda na yung local government code, gusto na natin palitan, pero yung essence niya ng dual entity, hindi pa natin nagagawa.
Thank you for emphasizing those points, Dr. Javier. At this point, I would like to thank you. You'll be back for our panel discussion. But now for a more local perspective, let me bring in our EEC, LIPO, and Tourism Officer from Cagayan Province. Good morning, Ma'am Jennifer Bakiran. Thank you for speaking to us today. Magandang umaga po, ma'am. Siguro my first question to you is how badly was Cagayan's economy impacted by the pandemic?
Narinig po ako.
Yes, ma'am, please proceed.
Sorry, hindi kita marinig.
Ma'am, okay, let me repeat the question, ma'am. you hear me now? Can you hear me now, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Okay, ma'am. So, just to repeat the question, you being the EEC, LIPO, and Tourism Officer of Cagayan Province all in one, how badly was Cagayan's economy impacted by the coronavirus po?
Sige, let me share to you my slide, yung sa impact of pandemic to Cagayan's economy. Though some of the figures come from the Cagayan Valley status of the economy. Okay. Next slide. So on March 8, President Duterte declared state of public health emergency, and the Luzon area was in ECQ. And then in March 21, we had our first COVID case in the region. And in May 1, Cagayan was under GCQ. Medyo lumuwag na yung aming mga restrictions. But noong August 26 to September 4, nagkaroon ulit kami ng MECQ because of the rise in the number of COVID positive in the city. So today, meron tayong 72 na COVID positive in the whole province. So makikita ninyo na nagfa-fluctuate yung aming quarantine procedures or protocols in the province. So mas mahirap. Next slide, please. Naririnig ba ako?
Ano yung mga bagay na yun?
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed po.
Okay, so given imposition of community quarantine, economic activities in Cagayan have stopped, or if resumed, it's in a slow, regulated, restricted operation. So the estimation of the impact of the community quarantine to Cagayan's economy is still difficult to assess at this time. However, the extent of losses can be assumed from foregone revenues of three productive sectors. So ito yung titingnan natin. Yung agricultural sector. Okay, I called this from the Regional Recovery Program of Cagayan Valley from the National Economic Development Authority. So for the agricultural sector of the province of Cagayan, because of the unsold produce due to lesser demand and unavailability of transport and trade, there were about 57 hectares not planted and 6.5 million worth of income loss for Region 2. And then 204 DA said agribusiness CQ and the MECQ. Next slide. And for the services sector, the retail and wholesale establishments were closed, tourism not allowed, and schools were closed. So talagang naapektuhan yung tourism in Region 2. We had 160 tourism enterprises and hotels that ceased to operate. Nagkaroon ng loss of livelihood for 623 tour guides and operators. So totaling to 1.32 billion worth of losses sa tourism in Region 2. And then enterprise businesses halted in the region, about 12,851 of trade. We have forgone 3.8 billion. Next slide, please. For the industry sector on quarrying, mining, construction, and manufacturing, there were losses due to a complete work suspension. So, and there was lack of raw materials and less available workers. So, ang forgone revenue is 10.828 billion. Next slide, please. On our total unemployed and unemployment in the Cagayan Valley region from April 29 to April 20. Abrupt rise of unemployment figure. about 15.6% ang unemployment ng Cagayan Valley region because of the health restrictions or health protocols that we had. Next slide, please. So initially, we have an estimated economic impact during the Luzon ECQ sa gross regional domestic product, 16.02 billion. So an aggregate of sa agriculture, 6.35 million, and industry and services na 16.1 billion. So that's how massive ang impact ng COVID-19 dito sa Cagayan Valley region po.
Ma'am, even agriculture was negatively impacted.
Yes, unfortunately, yes, because of the there was no transport for their goods. So, kaya impact din yung agriculture. Actually, we had parang meron kaming farmer na nagpo-provide ng mga talong sa Balintawak. So about tonne-tonneladang mga eggplants. So ang difficulty nila was to transport their eggplants to Balintawak. So what the LGU did was to facilitate this one. So mga ganon. Nagkaroon ng mga impact lalo na sa ating mga farmers.
So you've shown us the wide-ranging cross-sectoral effects of the pandemic, especially in Cagayan and in the region. So did this disrupt the planning process for, say, the 2021 budget, as well as the medium-term plans of the LGU?
Basing on the synchronized local planning and budgeting calendar, allow me to show you yung slide of the calendar. Ayan. So for fiscal year 2021, by the month of August dapat, we have finished already our budget hearing. This means that beforehand, as early as June, a budget call, budget forum, and submission of budget proposals of the different departments should have been accomplished. Juggling the LGU's present and pressing vital role in managing the effects socially and economically of the COVID-19 pandemic to its constituents and its other tasks of maintaining the regular operations of the LGU is very tough. Definitely, somehow, the planning and budgeting activities for fiscal year 2021 have slowed down a bit as health protocols were implemented. But LGUs learned to adapt to the new normal and found itself using available technologies just to facilitate the process and achieve this expected output. Some use like this, Zoom, Google Hangouts, Messenger, and other digital platforms. In our case, the provincial government of Cagayan continued to have our management committee meetings regularly so that we can facilitate what we have to do in the LGU. So nabit naman namin yung deadline ng August 15. Yan. Next slide. So sa local budget process kasi napakahaba ng processing. So we have preparation, authority from the sanggunian, and another review of what we have prepared for budget and plans. And then before we execute it and be accountable to its execution. So next slide. The budget or fund available for LGUs to plan about for next year, however, have decreased as forecasts are based on the actual fiscal performance this year, which due to the pandemic has greatly decreased. What are the different sources of our funds? So you can see there yung local or internal sources, yung external sources, and the non-income receipts also. Because of our health protocols, LGUs have difficulty coping with its targeted collections from its local sources. Nevertheless, we have emphasized our planning to find ways to resume social and economic activities while ensuring us to sustain efforts to manage the pandemic. But in our case, ang talagang pumalo lang sa aming local internal source is the quarrying fees. So yun ang nadami because of the, we have continued yung construction and so yung demand nito for the quarry mas mataas during this time.
Ma'am,
Next slide.
yung payment system niyo, yung collection system niyo, is it still analog or is it partly digital now? Or are you still adapting?
Oh, unfortunately, we are still on analog. Manual pa rin tayo. So yun din ang ginagawa ng ating LGU ngayon. We're thinking of digitizing everything. Lahat ay contactless payment. So we're talking with certain people already so we can do this one at mas madali at safer for our constituents also.
Ma'am, in your one of your incarnations at the LGU being also the LAPO, the LAPO being a fairly recent addition to the LGU structure, it was through a 2010 DILG memorandum that mandated the creation of the LAPOs, and one of its functions was to establish a local economic database. So in this sense, LGU should have a fairly good idea of the economic losses brought about by the pandemic. In your honest assessment, can LGUs now make customized recovery plans, whether that's economic enterprises, investment or tourism, yung mga nabanggit kanina ni Dr. Asser about the retail, yung mga small-scale industries?
Alam mo, nakakatuwa nga that I've heard from Dr. Bukat and Dr. Asser a while back, a lot of ideas on the economic recovery and economic development of the province. I agree that though 10 years na yung ating DILG Memorandum Circular, talagang fairly new pa rin sa structure ng province or ng LGUs, ang Local Economic and Investment Promotions Office. Actually, in the province alone, next slide, please. We have 28 municipalities and 1 city, but we only have 24 municipal LAPOs and one city LAPO and 1 provincial LAPO. With that statistics alone, you can see that some of LGUs do not still find siguro importance of having a LAPO in their different respective LGU. Yes, and most of our current LAPOs are also concurrent BPLO. So hindi lang ako yung dalawa ang hinahawakan, So sila rin. Marami sa ating municipal LAPOs are at the same time BPLO. Maybe because dahil mas madaling kumuha ng data if you are BPLO also. So next slide, please. So what do we usually get ba in the local economic database? So of course, we get to know, katulad ng sabi ni Dr. Asser kanina, we have to know or we have to map our province or our areas of responsibility. So we have to know the primary sector, yung secondary sector, tertiary sector, and informal sector, and other economic indicators. Honestly, bago lang kasi akong Local Economic and Investment Promotions Officer of the province, but honestly, looking at the database that we have and how we do our data gathering and the system that we have, I agree with Dr. Asser that definitely there should be a blended vertical and horizontal communications on this one, on the database that we have. Medyo mahirap kasi na mag-collecta rin ng database sa LGU. But I think, not that I am saying that there has been no interventions by the national government agencies to LGUs regarding this one. I think NGAs should come together so that yung network, yung paggagawa nga ng system for economic plans and decision making should be strengthened. So as to naman, sinasabi mo kanina, if the local economic database of the LGUs can already be used in the customized recovery plans. Definitely, syempre, meron pa ring malaking factor or advantage sa LGU na gumawa ng sarili niyang customized economic plan kasi alam niya kung anong meron siya sa kanyang probinsya at alam niya kung anong direksyon gusto niyang puntahan ng kanyang LGU. But yun nga, kanina, meron tayo pa rin mga mahirap na kunin na mga data na kinakailangan pa rin merong interlocal cooperation nga. Kailangan mag-harmonize yung mga plano ng bawat sektor at ng bawat area ngayon. Lalo na ngayong COVID, napakahirap magplano kasi kailangan alam mo kung ano rin yung plano ng mga karatig pook mo at paano kayo mag-complement to each other sa inyong mga plans. So, yun.
So, tangentially, ma'am, nabanggit din yun ni Dr. Javier and kayo. Very interesting yung inyong shinare na marami din sa mga municipal lay posts have multiple designations or may iba BPLO rin. Does this speak of some level of integration among the local government economic services departments? Like, I mean, the treasurer is also operating the public enterprises, and then somehow is the LAPO should be doing this enabler function, and then because of the evolution of the LGU structure, there are economic offices here and there, no? So what are your thoughts about that?
That's true. Minsan nag-aaway pa kung sino ba talaga ang hawak ng economic enterprises. But however, with the local economic investment promotions office, we are creating a center wherein all of the departments concerned on economic enterprise will come together and talk about how they can help out each other on economic plans and decisions for the province. So with that, nagkakaroon na ng synergy yung mga plans and even actions na dati pinag-aawayan.
Okay, we'll leave it there for a while, ma'am. We'll bring you in later to the panel discussion. To give us another perspective, we have a secret guest today. We've invited, I think, kaparehong region niyo, ma'am. Before we move on to the to the panel discussion, let me bring in a surprise guest for more contextualization. I think some localities also share the same situation as they have in this province. So we've invited someone from the spectacular province of Batanes, the northernmost part of the Philippines. We have a CLRG alumnus, former Sabtang councilor, and also tourism entrepreneur, and he's currently now acting chief of staff at the Vice Governor's office. Can we now bring in Mr. John Barkham Neala? Good morning, Sir JB. Kumusta na ang Batanes?
Good morning, Sir Paeng.
Hi. Thank you for accepting our invitation kahit medyo short notice. So I guess let me start with the question that Batanes is very, very unique that in a sense that zero COVID cases pa rin kayo today. And what contributed to that? Bakit zero pa rin kayo aside from malayo kayo and relatively isolated?
Hello, good morning. I think ang pinaka naging helpful sa pagiging COVID-free natin is the swift decision of the provincial government on prioritizing health over economy. So as early as February, cruise ships were barred entry and a total tourist ban in early March. So yun yung naging pinaka unang-una siguro na naging barrier ng pagpasok ng COVID. And then right now, we are accepting LSIs, but according to local ordinance, every 16 days lang yung pumapasok natin ng mga na eroplano. So talagang easy, manageable siya. So I think dahil dun sa simple na gano'n na restrictions on travel, na-regulate natin yung pagpasok ng sakit.
Before COVID, sir, Batanes was a rising star in tourism. You have you have some of the most Instagrammable sites in all of the Philippines. And sabi ko nga, biniro nga kita kanina, baka mag-zoom ka from Marlborough Country and mapapasana all na lang kami. but since you mentioned that you were restricting travel to Batanes very early on, how has tourism been affected by this pandemic?
So with regards to tourism, so naging zero talaga. There's zero tourism activity since early March. So immediately affected ang ating local entrepreneurs. These are hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, travel agency owners, and its entire supply chain. So the tourism industry dito sa Batanes, meron tayong minimum estimates of around 700 million pesos in revenue per annum, excluding the fares. So ito yung umiikot lang dito sa Batanes na na pera. So if that would be translated to the actual arrival natin pre-COVID, in 2020 alone, there's more than 500 million pesos in tourism revenues that's been lost here in Batanes. And then other than the entrepreneurs, yung mga business owners natin, we have yung mga frontliners natin. There are estimated 1,500 tourism frontliners that were displaced due to the closure of tourism. So ito yung ating mga tour guides, drivers, hotel and restaurant employees, yung mga bankero natin. So 1,500 is already around 9% of the total population of Batanes. So ito yung frontliners pa lang natin. So makikita natin na talagang napakalaki nung naging epekto. And then, siyempre, yung supply chain ng tourism, yung mga fishermen natin, yung farmers natin, store owners, even shipping lines, yung operations na have been reduced since the demand is only for local consumption. And to consider that the locals are themselves, we are facing financial challenges. So this pandemic really gave a hard blow sa entire population in terms of economically.
I'm sure a lot of those listening in who are from small island provinces and island municipalities can relate to the experience of Batanes, specifically because probably mabababa yung cases na nandun sa lugar nila, but they are so severely affected economically by the lockdowns because of the disruption. And for a small province, 500 million, ang laki rin ng nawala sa inyo. I had no clue that tourism was bringing 700 million annually to Batanes, and so sad to hear that 1,500 tourism frontliners have suffered from this. And given these issues, what are the things that are being considered now by the provincial government when it comes to reopening the local economy as well as for economic recovery?
Ito yung maganda, Sir Paeng, no? So, although nagkaroon ng early closure ng Batanes, mag-aga din yung action ng provincial government. The provincial government has already been spearheading reboot of our local economy. So, nag-establish siya ng loan facilities for the affected sectors. So, ang provincial government has 10,000 pesos livelihood loan for displaced workers, payable in 2 years without interest. So, magpo-propose ka lang ng livelihood proposal mo. And then also, microfinancing was also established, funded from the savings in the 20% development fund. So, the microfinancing program aims to loan an amount up to 500,000 pesos to businesses with less than 5 million capitalization, while a loanable amount of up to 1 million pesos to businesses with more than 5 billion capitalization. So this is not limited to tourism entrepreneurs. So in fact, all legitimate businesses here in the province may apply. So they just need to present their documentary proof of their business and their 2018 and 2019 financial statement for the assessment of their capacity to pay. So, and also to further finance the microfinancing, ang provincial government natin is nag-apply na rin siya for a 100 million loan sa Land Bank of the Philippines. So, and then, other than the loan facility, the provincial government had employed displaced workers. Yung mga displaced workers natin, they were employed for the upkeep and rehabilitation of tourist sites in preparation of the eventual opening of tourism. So ito din, ginamit din to ng tourism office. So nag-grab nito yung time to work on the revival of intangible crafts natin. So nag-showcase sila locally, and then they are training yung ating mga interested participants for may lost craftsmanships tayo about beadworks, weaving, blacksmith. So this could be additional juice sa ating tourism kapag nag-open ulit ang Batanes sa tourism.
Speaking of businesses po, you're also nakikita ko sa Facebook posts mo, you're also an entrepreneur. One of it which is in tourism. What are your apprehensions and challenges now that you are confronting as regards this so-called new normal that we are facing because of the pandemic?
With regards to the apprehensions and the challenges, I've recently talked to a former president of the Batanes Chamber of Commerce. You actually arrive at the same idea that the overhead expenses would be a general challenge for every tourism business entrepreneur. This is due to the safety protocol set by the Department of Tourism. Sabi nga, without the vaccine, regulatory standards are already and will be established, which would translate into expenses. So the number of clients are also regulated, which means less in income. So it would boil down to income against expenses argument.
Okay, mahirap ano sir. Also at this point, let me bring in the entire panel. Maraming salamat Sir JB.
Thank you.
Mamaya may tanong ka sa open forum, you can also come in. So let's bring in the entire panel now. For those of you who are just listening in to our conversation, we are still discussing the next steps for rebooting the local economies, which will of course be led by our local government units. Okay, welcome back Dr. Aser, Dr. Bukut, and Ma'am Jenny. So anong comments niyo dun sa, I guess maybe this is a question for Dr. Javier and Dr. Bukut first. Anong comments niyo dun sa experience ng Batanes?
Ladies first.
Okay. Number one, thank you, Dr. Asser. Number one, I tend to agree that, locking down earlier or preventing, the spread of the disease earlier, controlling it earlier is better for the local community. However, prolonged lockdowns would really impact on the economic side. So in small island destinations, this is probably the problem because they are really dependent mostly on tourism revenues. And I'm quite surprised maybe that 700 million loss at this time is really huge for a small island like Batanes. But to my mind, what they did, the local government did to roll out microfinance program is really very, I think, worth following from other LGUs. Kasi microfinance would help, small businesses survive this, lull in arrivals. No travel, no tourism. And then using this period to be able to develop new businesses, to be able to reskill workers, especially on cultural assets, cultural and intangible mga resources. Using these is really admirable, and I think that Batanes is leading the way, on how to recover from this pandemic. And likewise, the LGUs coordinating with the chambers of commerce is one of the steps really to recover from pandemic in tourism, because the tourism is more private sector led. Okay. Though we only support tourism, like around 3.7% of our budget or government expenditures go to tourism. 12.7% of share in tourism's 12.7% share in GDP is really huge. Considering that, the backbone of tourism is really the private sector. So Dr. Asser is right in his presentations that yes, we don't uh, uh, create the jobs. We support the jobs that are already there. And ito yung mga jobs na nasa tourism. Okay? So yun. That's my reaction to sa ano ng Batanes. Really admirable.
Dr. Javier?
Let me congratulate first our two local government representatives here, si Engineer Jen, saka si John Barkham, JB. There are very few people like you who think and look at this way. So congratulations sa inyong dalawa. Unang-una, sabi ni Dr. Bukat, admirable. Yes, that's very true. Na very admirable yung mga ginagawa nyo dyan at nangangalap kayo ng datos, nangangalap kayo ng mga innovations para magkaroon ng malawakang pagbangon ng ekonomiya. Ang gusto ko lang i-emphasize na dapat natin tingnan, hindi natin kaya na tayo lang ito pagdating sa local government. Hindi rin kaya na yung ating mga nakagawian na mga subsidy programs ay yun din yung ating programs pagdating sa economic recovery. Kasi mauubusan tayo. Hindi lang, nakarinig ako kanina kay JB na nakahanda na ang inyong utang. Hindi lang naman kayo, marami pang iba. Pero ako, medyo hindi ako masyadong tumitingin sa ganoon kasi yung cash injection, para negosyo mo titingnan meron ka bang pagkukunan ng balik? So, yung pagbalik, kung kukunin mo sa taxation, babagsak naman yon. So, kinakailangan medyo maliwanag kung saan natin kukuhanin yung mga pambayad na ito kasi kailangan natin tingnan na tayo ay corporate din, hindi lang tayo political na sasabihin natin kailangan talaga ng taong bayan. So, yun yung isa ko lang gustong i-emphasize. Dapat maliwanag saan natin kukunin din yung pambayad sa mga utang na ito. Kung tayo ay magpapautang, kung tayo magpapaprovide ng grant o magpapaprovide tayo ng loans. Pangalawa ay maraming paraan. Noong isang araw nasa Home Depot po ako, nung isang araw dito sa Amerika, nagulat po ako. Alam niyo po ang assistance ng local government, yung mga nawalan ng trabaho, yun yung ise-seminar nila para sa mga handyman jobs para dito sa loob ng bahay. So ito yung corporate na makakatulong mo yung korporasyon kasi bibili ng pako, bibili ng lagari, pero may trabaho. So kikita si negosyo pagkatapos si karpintero meron ding matatrabaho. So tutulong si negosyo. So hindi ba pupunta lang sa local government yung burden na tayo yung magbi-build ng capital para sa business support. So you see, sa workforce development, all we have to look at is to look at it from a very innovative perspective rather than from a Superman perspective na tutulong tayo. So, hindi natin kasi kaya ngayon, kahit na anong politika natin, at delikado pa tayo politically, baka sa mga mayors na nakikinig sa atin, kapag ganitong approach natin, patay tayo sa 2022. Kasi hahanapan kung patuloy natin at titingnan na ang ating approach ay tayo yung aasahan. Hindi. Tayo yung magke-create ng enabling environment. Tayo yung magbibigay ng pag-asa. Hindi tayo yung aasahan.
Okay, so I think connected question to Ma'am Jen. since mukhang kayo ang hub ng Batanes when it comes to the supplies, di ba nabanggit ni Sir JB yung yung shipping was affected, and since demand for a lot of the goods in Batanes came down because of decline in tourism, posibleng yung mga tao who were in Cagayan who were supplying Batanes were also affected.
Oo, talagang yun din, talagang mahirap ang trade ngayon dito sa province. Even within the province, mahirap na rin eh. May mga restrictions ang bawat municipalities kasi iba-iba kami ng status rin ng COVID. Kaya may iba-iba kaming restrictions. So napakahirap talaga. Siguro in relation to what kasi na-present ng ating kasama sa Batanes yung kanilang programs sa Batanes. Baka na i-present ko naman yung aming programs sa Cagayan, ano. I have a slide actually.
Yes,
Ano na lang.
We'll put it up.
Oh, so I can share also our actions in the province. So yung number 4, we go to the next slide. So I can show you already immediately yung aming actions. Next slide. Next slide. Ayan. So I would like to share kasi sa province namin, we have a program on No Town Left Behind wherein all of the municipalities annually are given 3 million pesos by the provincial government of Cagayan. So ito, binibigay annually po ito. And then we also have No Barangay Left Behind, yung 500,000 pesos per barangay. And we have 820 barangays. So you could only imagine how much we are doling out or giving or spending for our municipalities and barangays. So itong project na ito, kalahati nito ay for soft projects like scholarship and other capacity building trainings that the barangays or would want. And then we also organize yung Purok Agkaykay sa organization. Ito pong project na ito ay pre-COVID pa. Yan, pre-COVID na project. So mayroon tayong Purok Agkaykay sa. So we went down up to the Purok level so that they become our direct connection to the households. Now that we have the pandemic, what we set up for the towns and the barangays, ang nangyari po, next slide, meron tayong Magsakabataan project wherein we focus sa youth. We gave them native chicken and vegetable and fruit seedlings sa barangay. Households po ito. So nag-iikot ngayon ang provincial government para mag-disperse ng mga products or commodities na ito sa ating mga kababayan. Because the provincial government would like to have them, meron silang sustenance or food sufficiency in the household. And one more is food production naman po. So that they become part of the food production chain later on. Once they have more produce from all the things that we have given them. So with that, hand in hand, gagawa kami ng Food Development Center kung saan innovations on products and on food ang magkakaroon tayo. Itong Food Development Center will not only be helping yung mga binigyan natin na nasa household, but it will also help the MSMEs if they have products for packaging or labeling so that they could level up or enhance their products. And then ito rin, yung Food Development Center natin will provide food relief in case we have crisis. Lalo na ang province ng Cagayan po at ang Batanes ay lagi pong tinatamaan ng bagyo. So yun din. Meron tayong Food Development Center. And namimigay rin kami ng iba pang ayuda like increase in honoraria of our foot soldiers. So yun po. So we marry yung ating households to the LGU. So we make sure na kahit sa kadulu-duluhang part ng provincial government of Cagayan ay makarating po yung ating mga tulong. So yan po ang aming project.
That's very interesting, ma'am, because that fits into what Dr. Asser has been telling us about inclusive LEB. You having a program on the barangay no barangay left behind, which is also a good segue to my next question to you, the panel. With regard to tourism, we may have the best island in the world, which is Palawan. But our neighbors in Southeast Asia have bested us when it comes to tourism, in specifically in making the biggest bang for the tourist buck, so to speak. So pag tinignan po ninyo yung aming slide, Thailand is number one when it comes to arrivals, and they're making a lot of money from their tourists, and we're down at number 6, far from the 15 million arrivals in Vietnam. We only have about half of that, and Cambodia is fastly catching up with us. And since tourism was hardly impacted by COVID, what makes tourism as an industry a more challenging industry in the post-COVID era? And what do you think we should just sort of rethink tourism and look into more nativist industries, say like agriculture and manufacturing again? Kasi po, there was this statement from the Philippine Fiber Industry Development Authority, and they said that well, the surgical mask is made out of abaca fiber. I don't know kung may abaca kayo, ma'am, sa Cagayan. And the Philippines controls 87% of the world's production of abaca. But ironically, the world's biggest producer of masks is China and not us, if we have the raw material, di ba? So your thoughts po, sticking with tourism, or should we look into other industries now? Siguro Dr. Javier, first crack at the question.
Thank you, Paeng. First and foremost, we have to contextualize what our position is with regards public health and economic recovery is. So the LGU have to determine that. If we try to look at the various approaches that we have done for public health, I think maliwanag naman at naiintindihan ng tao yan. So yung tatlo, so hand sanitation, face shield and face mask, and physical distancing. So if we will be true to these protocols, ang problema lang kasi mahirap ipatupad ito sa Pilipinas kasi masyadong maliliit, wala tayong magandang public transportation, ang mga communities natin dikit-dikit. No? So ito yung mga issues pagdating sa pagpasok ng positioning ng public health, pagdating sa economic recovery, especially sa tourism. But ang aking tingin dito papasok ang local development at autonomy ng mga local governments at paano natin i-influencean ang ating mga national decision makers na kagaya sa Batanes, wala namang COVID doon, kagaya sa ibang areas na walang COVID, baka tayo ay hindi sumali na dyan. Ngayon, sa ating sa position na lang natin, ay doon natin makikita yan. Pangalawa, ay dapat tingnan natin yung kinabanggit ni Dr. Bukat na magsisimula tayo doon sa mismong tayo rin ang customer. Hindi necessarily na international o grand scale kagad kung hindi phases. Kasi maraming stages ang recovery eh. Pwede natin tingnan niya yung tinatawag na yung open-close economy, yan yung pinakamasakit. Kagaya na nangyayari sa Pilipinas ngayon. Minsan GCQ, MECQ, gano'n. Yan ang pinakamahirap, sabi ng mga eksperto, na makarecover. Kasi mag-i-invest ka, pas biglang wala uli. So, kinakailangan maliwanag yung ating direksyon, kagaya ng ibang marami namang mga LGU sa mahuhusay na nakikita natin na pwede nating i-localize o i-contextualize ang ating mga pamamaraan para siguraduhin na tayo ay kikita at the same time masusunod ang lahat ng public health protocols natin.
Dr. Bukat?
Yes. Tama yung sinabi ni Dr. Javier. So we really have to start locally. Reopening of tourism, especially international tourism, is far-fetched kasi ongoing pa yung cases, and as I've said, yung image natin in the international community, masyado pang mataas ang compared to other ASEAN or Asian nation, mataas ang ating COVID cases. So kung ang pagbabasihan is image and reputation ng Pilipinas in combating this plague or this pandemic, medyo mababa tayo sa ladder nung dun sa ASEAN. Pero tinitingnan natin on a local level, a more granular data shows na ang mga probinsya natin, especially the islands, are still COVID-free. And we can capitalize on, interlocal travel. Kaya nga mahalaga ang coordination among local government units and regional units of the government para maisakatuparan ito. We cannot ditch tourism altogether because sabi ko nga sa'yo, 12.7% of GDP are from tourism. And maliit na part lang nito ang international tourism sa Pilipinas. Maybe in Thailand, international tourists talaga ang bumubuhay ng kanilang tourism. Sa Pilipinas, hindi po. Mas malaki po ang share ng domestic tourism natin in terms of sa local economy.
Ma'am Jen, any thoughts?
I agree with them, sabi ko kanina. Sorry, naka-mute pala ako. I agree with Dr. Bukat and Dr. Javier on what they said that we have to start sa local tourism or domestic tourism. Sa amin nga dito sa Cagayan, actually local tourism sa amin lang. Province muna magi-start ang turismo kung sakali. Kasi talagang nafe-feel namin na at talagang naiinip na talaga ang mga tao rin na mag-travel, lalo na dito naririnig mo kasi sa constituents na tagal ng paano na, kailangan din namin ng ibang, kasi yung mental state din ng tao, very important eh. Diyan nakakatulong ang turismo paminsan-minsan kasi merong leisure activity. Pangalawa, yung sabi mo na nativist industries like agriculture and import substitution, yung sabi mo, no? Yung sa agriculture, pwede kasing i-marry yun eh. Lalo na ngayong pandemic, napakagandang area kung saan maging tourist attraction yung agriculture. So right now, our province is into farm tourism. We're looking at having farm tourism as the number one tourism product that we will offer once tourism will be allowed during the pandemic. Kahit na tong pandemic or the new normal. So prepare na namin yung areas namin for farm tourism. So it does not necessarily mean na
Yes, ma'am. Salamat po. Siguro po last question for the panel discussion before we proceed to the open forum. Many experts have said that for the economy to recover and to reopen, there's this tension between schools reopening. Kasi parents would not be able to work fully, especially those who are unable to work from home. To go to work, they'll have a hard time because the child is at home. Hindi naman po lahat may yaya, di ba? And so how do we balance that? I mean, do we really have to wait for the schools to reopen to fully open the economy again? Sino po ang Dr. Javier? Your thoughts po?
Yes. Prior to COVID, I did one research for one particular city wherein we are looking at subdivisions where we can deploy various handymans as part of our economic development plan for various unemployed citizens and persons in that communities. At ito, maliwanag pwede rin natin gawin dito sapagkat panahon ng pandemya ngayon, marami ang nangangailangan sa atin habang ang magulang ay wala sapagkat ang kanilang mga bata ay nag-aaral sa bahay. Ako bilang consultant ng Department of Education sa national level sa Pilipinas ay ang aming rekomendasyon ay magkaroon ng tinatawag na mentoring hubs o alternative tutorials kung saan ang mga eksperto o yung mga ibang walang trabaho na pwede mag-provide ng services para sa mga bahay ay siyang tumulong sa mga magulang bilang mga learning facilitators sa kasalukuyan. Katatapos ko lang ng webinar kanina kung saan didiscuss ko ang trabaho ng mga PTA saka ng mga parents kung saan ang role lang nila ay learning facilitator. So dito pwede natin magkaroon tayo under the Learning Continuity Plan ng DepEd na sinusuportahan ng maraming LGU sa buong Pilipinas na magkaroon ng mga tinatawag natin na support services and mechanism para siguraduhin yung mga bahay o households na mayroong ganitong problema ay magkaroon ng epektibong mekanismo o programa ang ating mga local governments.
Any thoughts po from our two other panelists?
Sa akin palagay ko hindi pa handa ang ating mga eskwelahan o educational institutions para sa isang face-to-face na learning environment. So talagang nasa bahay pa talaga sila. Ngayon, sa paggabay sa mga bata habang ang mga magulang ay nagtatrabaho o nagte-training, siguro mainam na gawa ng magandang scheduling or tinatawag na mga remote learning modes na hindi kailangan nandun yung magulang para mag-aral yung bata. Ibig sabihin, kung hindi magagabayan ng magulang, hindi naman dapat mag-online na yung bata eh. Merong mga paraan na remote modes na kung nandyan lang ang magulang at saka makakaroon ng siguro guidance. Kasi we cannot really focus on the education of the kids while we are thinking of sa livelihood ng pamilya. So bibigyan ng oras dapat yun. I think ang DepEd ay gumagawa ng paraan para yung remote learning modes ay hindi kailangan na online o synchronous. May mga asynchronous na mga gawain na pwedeng pagtulungan ng magulang at ng bata o ng estudyante para matutunan yung mga lessons nila. Siguro matter of lang yun sa pag-google ng tamang panahon sa pag-aaral at paghahanap buhay ng mga magulang. Kaya ang learning packages na i-develop ng mga eskwelahan, especially ng public schools, ay angkop dito sa remote learning modes, hindi online.
Ma'am Jen?
Actually, dito sa province, ang governor namin, he challenged actually the Department of Education when they said that they'll open already the schools and they let the children papasok na sila online or blended. Kasi nakita namin yung ating mga kababayan na nasa far-flung areas. Paano naman sila? Kamusta naman sila? Wala namang pwedeng online doon. Hindi rin naman pwede ang blended. So, paano rin naman yung magulang nila na kinakailangan magtrabaho? Ngayon sa pagpapapasukin natin yung ating mga bata, the parent is expected to teach them. So, how will the parent work kung meron siyang additional na parang ganyan naggagawin? Saka, they should take into consideration na oftentimes sa far-flung areas, yung parent natin ay hindi rin nakapag-aral. So how can they do that? How can they teach yung kanilang mga kids na maiiwan kung magbubukas na kaagad? So dapat talagang pag-isipan pa rin ng ating DepEd how to go about this, and also our economists kung paano rin naman kikita pa rin ang ating mga magulang while they are at home.
Paeng, clarification ko lang, no?
Yes, sir.
Hindi po papapasukin ng mga bata. Bilang nagsasalita ako bilang consultant ng DepEd ngayon. No? Hindi po papapasukin ng bata. Walang face-to-face na mangyayari. At ang tinatawag po nating blended learning ay hindi ang magulang ang magtuturo. Ang mga modules pong ipamimigay natin ay self-learning modules, self-directed learning. In other words, it's the module that is the teacher. So ang trabaho ng parent ay learning facilitator and assessor of learning na inire-report nila sa eskwelahan.
Thank you for the clarification, sir. Very, very interesting thoughts about that. But let me now proceed to the questions from our audience who have been patiently listening into our conversation. Meron pong dalawang related questions from Municipal Councilor from Canaman, Camarines Sur, Councilor Leonardo Moralios, and from our friend from the National Youth Commission who is based in Benguet, si Ma'am Sheridan Gahete. And their question is about funding for local recovery. Because now, due to the limitation on accessing the 20% development fund, malamang ubos na rin yung iba. Where is the best place where they can get the funding? And which is related to the next question with regard to debt na nabanggit na rin ni Sir Asar kanina. Aside from debt, siguro Sir Asar, saan sila pwedeng kumuha ng funding?
Pag tiningnan po natin ang local economic development, siya po ay pillar number 2 ng Philippine Development Plan. Pagka nasa development plan po, ang isang siya po ay prioridad ng gobyerno. At kapag prioridad siya at nasa plano siya, ibig sabihin may pera siya. Yun yung pong una. Pangalawa po, halos lahat ng national government agencies ay may tinatawag po tayong Local Economic Development Program na para sa LGUs. So in other words, ang pera po maliwanag nasa national government. Ang hirap po, hindi natin kinukuha at i-download para sa LGUs. Pangatlo po kung punto kung saan kukuhanin ng pera ay dapat tingnan po natin na hindi tayo parang maliit na national government na nagpo-provide din tayo ng ayuda at kapital sapagkat ito ay depende sa kakayanan ng local government na kumita. So kung walang pinagkaiba po sa bahay yan, hindi kayo mamimigay sa inyong kapitbahay ng tulong kung wala naman kayong kakayanan. So kinakailangan i-develop po na muna yung kakayanan bago tayo mabigay. So ito yung vulnerabilities na lumabas ngayon sa pandemya. So ang ikatlo po ay dapat tingnan natin na hindi lahat tayo ay mamimigay ng pera o mag-i-inject ng cash sa ekonomiya para magkaroon ng economic recovery. Sapagkat pwede rin ang private sector na siya yung nag-i-inject ng cash pero ine-enable natin ang mga businesses at ang mga maliliit na negosyo na para sila ang maglabas ng cash sapagkat may feasible na babalik sa kanila. Ano ko lang yan? 2 cents ko lang paeng and sa nagtanong.
Yes.
Oo. Ako naman, sa tingin ko kasi, tama si Dr. Asser, private sector led ang turismo. Kaya ang private sector mismo ang mag-a-assess ng kanilang investment portfolio. Ibig sabihin, ang kailangan siguro ng LGU na i-prepare ay tamang datos. Kung talaga nga bang babalik ang pera na igugugol ng private sector sa turismo. Kasi kung walang planning tungkol dito, masasayang lamang ang investment ng private sector. So parang if the local government unit is giving the right direction at pinakikita ang mga tamang datos sa mga mamumuhunan, ito po ay pakikinabangan at sigurado po may mag-i-invest po sa turismo.
Ma'am Jen?
Sa ano naman, they have to review yung profile ng kanilang local government or yung kanilang bayan. Katulad sa amin, because we have the Cagayan River, meron tayong river restoration program. At sa river restoration program ngayon, we're looking at investors who want to help us with the restoration. Kukunin nila yung sand kasi marami ng siltation sa aming river. So kinukuha nila yung sand and other waste materials and they will pay. They will pay us. They will do the clean up for free and they will still pay us sa lahat ng makukuha nilang sand from us, the minerals that they will get. This is in partnership also with the national government agency, yung DPWH at DENR. Dahil dyan, nagkakaroon din kami ng additional income. So I think the local government units should really know what other assets they have at what other opportunities they can take advantage of. Baka hindi lang palang nila nakikita.
Hindi naman dolomite, ano yan ma'am? Dolomite sand.
Actually, mayroon kaming floating magnetite sand.
Opo, magnetite. Sige ma'am. Ay, related po dun sa nabanggit ninyo na malaki ang role ng private sector pagdating sa economic recovery and that the local government should be an enabler and of the environment. There's a question from Dr. Aristeo Salapa of the University of Southeastern Philippines in Davao del Sur. And very, very interesting question. What can public-private partnership do in rebuilding the local economy?
Unang-una, ang pag tiningnan natin ang framework ng local economic development sa Philippine local governments ay ang isa sa trabaho ng local government ay to make sure that there are business-like systems in the local governments. So that means ang enabling environment ay both ways working both ways. Unang working niyan ay kayo ay ginagaya ng local government sa inyong pamamaraan para makapag-deliver siya ng mas mabilis na serbisyo. At ang ikalawa ay titignan na kayo ang isang driver ng ekonomiya. So ang private sector ang driver ng ekonomiya. So yung gitna nun, yun yung tinatawag natin na smart economic development kung saan yung pangangailangan nyo at yung service delivery context ng local governments ay dapat nami-meet. So kinakailangan kung ikaw ay pribadong negosyo at kailangan si local government ang interest magkaroon ng maraming trabaho sa LGU, so kailangan mag-meet in between yan. Hindi pwedeng magkanya-kanya sapagkat later gagamitan tayo ng coercive powers ng local governments kung magkakanya-kanya. So kinakailangan sa simula pa lang magkaroon ng mahusay na pakikipag-ugnayan ang pamahalaan at saka ang mga establishmento lalo galing sa pribadong sektor.
Dr. Bukat?
Sa experience ko po, ang tourism is very robust ang private-public sector engagement. Especially, meron tayong mga local tourism councils na ang membership noon ay both nasa gobyerno at nasa pribadong sektor at mga manggagawa sa pribadong sektor. Ito po ay pakikilusin po natin sa panahon na recovery. Dahil kung wala pong intensive coordination between the two of them, hindi po maiisayos yung mga programa at mga sinasabi nating mga health protocols na kailangan na gawin at i-monitor at ipatupad ng local government at sundin ng mga private sector. At ang private sector naman po ang gagawa ng paraan para tumaas ang yield o ang kita sa turismo. At the same time, ang local government naman ay sila po ang magmamanage ng visitor arrivals. Ay hindi po pwede na huhugos lahat ang turista porke po inopen na natin. Malaki pong bahagi ang visitor management sa pagmamanage po ng ng ganitong klaseng crisis o slow recovery. So talaga pong intensive private-public coordination ang inaasahan po para po maging successful ang reopening o gradual reopening of tourism.
Jen?
With the pandemic, parang nakikita natin or nakikita yung difference ng role ng private at saka ng public sector. Masyadong luminaw. At luminaw din that they have to meet halfway. That they have to complement each other so that pareho silang aangat at pareho silang makakatulong sa economy nung lugar kung nasaan po sila. So talagang yung PPP talagang pinupush po natin yan sa local government unit.
There's a question from Batangas, law student and former Batangas LGU employee, Ms. Katrina Marie Magsino. She's asking whether there is a role or a place for cooperatives in the economic recovery efforts of local governments.
Lahat po ng sektor ay mayroong papel pagdating sa pagbangon ng komunidad. Titingnan po natin kung saan ba tayo mahusay, ano yung pwede natin i-contribute. Pagkatapos po, yun po yung ating advokasya sa ating pakikipagtulungan sa mga local governments. Kasi po, unang-una, ang mga local governments ay mandato na ng DBM through Memorandum Circular Number 80 na lahat ng kanilang Comprehensive Development Plan, AIP, budgets ay dapat patungo sa local economic recovery. So in other words po, yung natitirang pananalapi at lahat ng pananalapi ng LGUs dapat patungo sa local economic recovery. So pag ito ang pinag-usapan po natin na may mandato na galing sa national government na inuutusan ng mga LGUs, ibig sabihin lahat po tayo ay kasali. Sapagkat nandoroon yung partisipasyon na hinihingi sa atin na ang kinakailangan ay kasi sa atin tayo po yung audience o yung stakeholder na i-recover ni LGU eh. So maliwanag po meron tayong papel. Ang kailangan lang liwanagin ng dalawang sektor, ng pribado, ng kooperatiba at ng LGU. Ano yung mga papel na yan? Producer ka ba? Trader ka ba? Supplier ka ba? O consumer ka? So dapat maliwanag po yan.
Dr. Bukat, thoughts?
Wala na po siguro ako maidadagdag pa dahil talaga hong ang recovery ay isang whole of government approach at lahat ng stakeholders makikinabang o later pa makikinabang ay kailangan po magpag-cooperate po para po tuluyan ang recovery ng isang bayan.
Ma'am Jen, kumusta ang mga kooperatiba niyo sa Cagayan?
Marami kaming kooperatiba na successful dito. Kaya nga nakikita rin namin na napakahalaga ng role na dapat nilang gampanan kasi nga organized na sila, marami sila at malakas na yung kanilang membership. So dapat talaga meron silang malaking parte sa economic recovery ng ating bansa.
Okay, there's a comment on the chat box from Mr. Christopher Mantillas. Sabi niya, mukhang konti daw po sa mga local officials ang aware sa corporate powers ng mga LGUs. Hindi ko lang alam po yung mga nag-training sa amin, baka alam ko ano yung corporate powers. Pero anong solution natin doon, Dr. Javier? How do we create more local government officials who are aware and who will seize the moment and exercise their corporate powers?
Unang-una, dapat maliwanag sa atin na dalawa ang mukha ng local governments. Isang political public service at isang corporate community creation of wealth function. So dapat maliwanag yan. Karamihan sa ito ay responsibilidad ng karamihan ng mga opisyalis natin sa LGUs, lalong higit sa executive kasi sila ang magsasabi sa mga politiko na ito yung papel natin na hindi lang public service. Pangalawa ay dapat parang tinitingnan ko kasi 29 years old na ang local government code. Pag sinabi, Chris, na hindi ko naiintindihan yan, ibig sabihin, hindi nag-aaral ang ating mga kasama. So, sa 21st century, mahuhuli tayo kapag hindi nag-aaral ang ating mga institusyon. So, kung 29 years old na yung batas na yan at sinasabing ikaw ay corporate, ibig sabihin malala ang ating problema kasi nasa isang siglo tayo na kung saan ginagamit ang kaisipan at ang kaalaman samantalang ang pamamaraan natin ay huli. So, yan yung ikalawa. Ang ikatlo ay kinakailangan i-pressure na natin ang community. At itong pandemyang ito yung nagpe-pressure sa atin. Ito yung magsasabi sa atin na, hindi kaya ng public service lang. Hindi pwedeng dole out lang. Hindi pwedeng ayuda lang. Kinakailangan bumalik, kumita para yung meron pang ayuda sa mga susunod. So, pag tinignan natin ito, pumupunta tayo sa bagong revenue generation mechanisms natin na hindi tax-based, kung hindi nanggagaling sa indirect taxation, kung saan pinalalakas natin ang negosyo para ang negosyo maraming babayaran tax sa mga susunod na araw. So yun yung ikatlong direksyon. Ang ikaapat na direksyon ay magbabago ang trabaho ng mga lokal na pamahalaan sa ayaw at sa gusto natin. Yung HR, hindi na civil service ang susundin yan. Kung hindi ano ang human resource development ng barangay na magmamatch sa trabaho, na pangangailangan ng trabaho. Pangatlo, binanggit ni Dr. Bukat yung whole of government approach. Ito ay maliwanag na approach ng Philippine Development Plan na dapat nating tangkilikin sapagkat hindi tayo uubra na isolated tayo at very political lang ang ating moves kapag dalawa ang mukha natin. At hindi rin uubra na kada departamento, isang programa tayo sapagkat ang well-being, ang thinking dyan, health, nutrition, welfare. So pag tinignan mo, isang buo yan. Kaya sabi ni Engineer Jen kanina, hirap na hirap kami sa LEPO. Kasi hindi trabaho ng LEPO ang economic development. Ang trabaho niya ay integrator and coordinator siya ng economic development. So ito yung mga changes na mangyayari ang apat na yan.
Okay? Okay. Last question po for our open forum. We have a question. Nabanggit yung HR. She's an HR officer from the local government unit of Binyan, Ms. Cheryl Lu Pontillas. How do we ensure that there is transparency of efforts towards economic recovery? Transparency of efforts daw po.
I'll be quick in my answer.
Yes,
Hindi
sir.
lang during pandemic tayo nire-require ng transparency. Ang karamihan ng ating mga batas ay nagre-require sa atin tayo ay accountable and transparent. Ang issue dyan ay ginagawa ba natin? So kung hindi nyo ginagawa, kailangan gawin nyo.
Okay.
Yan ang tatak ng good governance, transparency. So kung meron mang mga programa na pinapatupad ang local government, ito ay para sa kaalaman ng lahat. Hindi lamang ng mga iilan sa gobyerno. So effective dissemination siguro ng mga programa at mga gastusin para sa mga programa.
I agree, na dapat it's the execution na mahirap. Lalo na sa local government unit. Ewan ko, yun ang aming experience din. Mahirap.
We only have 2 minutes left. Can I get your final thoughts for local economic recovery? Let's start with Ma'am Bukat, Dr. Bukat.
Okay, siguro para sa akin, let's make this an opportunity. Transformational ang opportunities ng COVID Kasi talagang sinisiksik niya tayo talaga sa dulo ng pasensya natin. Ito talaga yung wala ka na magagawa kundi mag-innovate. And this opportunity presents itself ngayon na isipin natin, if we're going to reset tourism, will we be able to, do we want to go back to where we were? Na talagang, minsan yun ang talagang unsustainable practices. Rampant na, napopollute yung ating magagandang mga beaches, nasisira yung ating mga natural resources, o titingnan natin itong pandemic na to as a time to rethink. Ano ba talaga ang valuable sa ating mga destinations? Ano yung mga cultural characteristics na would make us stand out? You value your place. You value the experience. Hindi po ito para lang magkapera ang LGU, kundi lasting po na image, tatak ng inyong destinations. And I think yung high yield na tinatawag na pagde-develop ng place ay makakamtan po natin if we plan now na habang wala pa po ang mga turista. At sa point of view ko po ay ang tourism ay hindi mawawala at hindi po ito isang bagay na pwedeng ipagpalit na lang sa ibang sektor ng economy natin dahil well connected na po ang buong mundo. ang transport systems po natin ay in place na at hindi na po natin mababalikan yung mga panahon na i-isolate natin ang ating mga bayan at mga sarili sa mundo. So, yun lamang po. At hopefully, we live in better times. But now is the time, opportunity to prepare for that better time. Thank you.
Jen, your thoughts po?
Okay, this month is the tourism month actually. So happy tourism month sa lahat. This is a month where we make people aware of the importance of tourism globally, that it can unite people, that it can give a lot of benefits kasi of its multiplier effect, down up to the informal sector. With that, I believe that even with this adversity, even with this pandemic, we can see something positive out of it. Makikita natin yung ating resilience, makikita natin yung innovativeness ng bawat isa, makikita natin yung initiatives na ginagawa ng bawat isa para lang makatulong sa isa't isa, kahit na sa kakaunting paraan lamang. So sana lahat tayo we look at this new normal as an opportunity for us to rethink our ongoing actions, yung mga systems na nakasanayan natin, tama ba ito? Ito ba ay tumutugon o tumutugma sa pangangailangan ng panahon ngayon at pangangailangan ng ating mga constituents? So palagay ko lahat tayo ay sanang sama-sama po sa new normal that we will have, and we'll have a better economy soon. Thank you.
Dr. Javier.
Nung isang araw, meron akong nakitang quotation na ang sabi, "The future belongs to those who imagine it today." What is happening right now is we are forced to think, just like what Engineer Jen is saying, we are forced to think of ways that we have not been trained, we have not been used to, even our practices, even our attitudes, but we are now forced to be put into that situation. That is why, sabi ni Dr. Bukat, we have to be very innovative and creative in trying to imagine everything. And in this imagination is where the answer lies. This creativity in looking at the future or tomorrow, not with fear, because fear is the absence of faith that something good will happen tomorrow. So with that, I advise all our colleagues in our local governments and to all your listeners of NCIP, to this program by NCPAG, let's imagine the future today.
Maraming salamat po. At this point, I would also like to bring in our boss at the center, our director, Professor Alice Celestino, who's been patiently listening to our conversation, gone slightly over time, for her closing remarks. So, Professor Celestino.
Okay, thank you so much, Paeng. So, it's almost 1 o'clock, so I will keep my message short. Unang-una, gusto ko kayong pasalamatan si Dr. Bukat, si Dr. Javier, si ENP Bakiran, and of course, si Jan Nayala for taking time to join us in this webinar, a very interesting show. And let me also congratulate you. Our Dean has congratulated you earlier, but I also want to congratulate you because of your very enlightening, very informative, but also very interesting presentations today. We have learned a lot of lessons from your presentations. And I wish all the LGUs in the country, the local government officials have tuned in para nadinig yung mga messages ninyo. Isa for instance is yung isang natutuhan ko from your presentation is, although yung tourism ay the hardest hit sector ng COVID, hardest hit sector ng ating economy ng COVID, hindi ibig sabihin na kalimutan na natin yung tourism. Sabi nga ni Dr. Bukat kanina, we could still start with local tourism, and may rejoinder si ENP Bakiran. Sabi niya, well, we can combine agriculture and tourism. Pwede tayong magkaroon ng agricultural tourism. So, hitting two birds with one stone. And personally, I have two major takeaways from the presentation of Dr. Javier. Very talaga enlightening po yung presentation ninyo. And I think you have a lot of wisdom siguro dahil sa experience ninyo working with the national and local government. So ang dami po naming natutunan sa inyo. Unang-una gusto ko pong banggitin, yung unang natutunan ko yung interlocal cooperation. CLRG has been advocating for the longest time itong interlocal cooperation. Pero up to now, hindi pa siya widely practiced. Di ba? If you agree with me. So parang LGU still operate as an island. Bawat LGU, isang kingdom. So medyo hindi masyado yung interlocal cooperation. Now is the time na mas kailangan po natin ng interlocal cooperation. Like for instance, binanggit kanina ni Dr. Javier, yung supply chain. So kailangan mag-collaborate, mag-cooperate, mag-interlocal cooperation yung mga LGU. Sino yung mga producers? Ano yung mga produce nila? Saan pupunta? Sino yung mga LGU na consumers? Kailangan mag-usap-usap sila para mapaganda yung supply chain. Hindi ma-hamper yung supply chain na yan. And then, my favorite topic also yung corporate powers ng local government units. Tama, may nag-comment kanina na, well, 2020 na tayo, pero ilang taon na yung local government code? 29 years na yung local government code, pero unfortunately po, marami pa rin LGUs ang hindi masyadong nakakaunawa kung ano yung kanilang corporate powers. That they are municipal corporations. Marami silang pwedeng gawin to create wealth, to help in the creation of wealth. Hindi lang mangutang, although it's part of their corporate powers to contract loans, hindi lang mangutang para ipamigay as loan assistance, kundi pwede rin pong mag-operate ng mga local public enterprises na pwedeng yung community ay mag-participate sa operation ng kanilang local public enterprises. Nabanggit kanina ni Dr. Javier yung sa case ng Iloilo, yung case ng Iloilo, tinutulungan ng LGU para i-market yung kanilang mga produce, di po ba? So, isa yon. So, I hope na if we have time, dapat siguro i-emphasize natin sa mga LGUs yung kanilang interlocal cooperation, yung pangangailangan, at saka yung maximization ng kanilang mga corporate powers. So, sinabi din kanina na yung pagbangon, economic recovery, local economic recovery, or rebooting the local economy, or the economy in general, hindi lang local, ay whole of government approach. I would say na it should be a whole of nation approach. The government leads, but the government should provide an enabling environment so that the community can participate sa pagbangon nating lahat. So with that, again, I should say that I'm so happy with the presentations, with this talk show, with this webinar that we have today, and we learned a lot from it. So again, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, si Dr. Bukat, Dr. Javier, ENT Bakiran, and of course, Jan. Meron pa ba tayong kailangan reminders, Paeng?
Meron pa ma'am later, but first we would like to give our tokens of appreciation to our panelists for today. We have a socially distant way of presenting our certificates of appreciation to all of you. Thank you very much po to Dr. Manina Bukat, to Ma'am Jen Bakiran, and to Dr. Asar Javier, who has been joining us from the USA, which is na ngayon ay 1 o'clock na ba ng madaling araw dyan, sir? At para po kay Sir JB Nayala rin, maraming salamat po sa inyo. sana po pag natapos na ang pandemya ay makapag-reunion tayo ng isang kahit man lang isang face-to-face na forum and look back at what has changed since our encounter today. Maraming salamat po. So, para po sa ating mga participants who are tuning in, maraming salamat din po pala sa aking mga teammates. Pasensya na po. Ako lang po ang muka na lumalabas sa screen, but all of the things that are happening right now for our webinars are being taken care of by our team from behind the scenes. We have our webinar course manager, si Miss Ellie Kureg. We have our floor director nasa aming studio, so to speak, si Maki Asuncion. We also have Prejan Prieto, Don Quebral, Lou Santos, who's joining us from Laguna, and Patty, who's joining us from Pampanga, and the other CLRG colleagues. Maraming salamat. Para po sa mga participants who are still asking dun sa chat box, ano pa ba yung mga susunod na webinars? We have 2 for this month. On the 15th, we have Combating an Invisible Enemy, One Journey, 7 Inspiring Stories of Victory. We have 7 mayors in that panel. So that will be at 2 p.m. on September 15th, Tuesday. And we have on the 24th of September, Youth and Risky Behaviors. This is sort of a research forum on our part, because this is a product of our latest research. Okay, so those who are looking forward to your certificates. Oh, sorry, plugging muna. We have recently released our book of readings. This is 2020 publication. This is our latest in the series of governments in the Philippines. So you have those topics. Many of them are still quite recent, and we have interlocal cooperation somewhere inside, available for only the very affordable price of 600 pesos, excluding shipping fee. So that would vary where you are ordering the book from. We also have weekly digests posted in our website, in our Facebook page. If you are not so keen on following the news every day, we have a digest. We have that for you every week. So you can check that also. Final reminders, our certificates will be released within 7 working days. To be eligible for a certificate, you must have been a registered participant. So you must be in the roster that we are holding. You must have tuned in to at least 70% of the webinar, Zoom or our website. And you must have answered the feedback form. So those are our 3 requirements for you to be able to get your certificate. We now have the QR code here, which you can scan. It will take you to the page where you can accomplish the feedback form, which is in our website. Okay, you can also ask our colleagues at the chat box for the link. And if you're not yet following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or regularly checking our website, these are our online handles. So that's our website, our Facebook page, and our Twitter account, and that's our email for our courses. I guess that's it. I would like to thank everyone for joining us in this webinar. And please keep safe, and hopefully in the future, we will be able to see each other again face to face. Maraming salamat po.